Gentlemen, long time no see.
First time this year.
Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah. It feels a long time. And we get to do it again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Now, I welcome representatives from Air Services Australia, and if you could just give your name and the capacity in which you appear today, please.
Jason Harfield, Chief Executive Officer, Air Services.
Paul Logan, Chief Financial Officer, Air Services.
Thank you very much. Do you wish to make an opening statement, Mr Hartfield? I'm
just a
sure
couple of
there's a lot of effect COVID's had on your agency.
I'll just make just a couple of opening remarks, Senator, and thank you very much for allowing us to appear to support our submission. Our role is all about the safety, efficiency and regularity of air navigation in Australian administered airspace. In order to continue this with the effects of COVID on the industry, whether there's one aircraft flying or 1,000, we've got to continue to do and provide those services. And so our framing around COVID has been around three particular areas. One was first and foremost the health and safety of not only our employees, but the resilience of our operations so that we could continue to do it based on the pandemic. And that meant some restructuring of our operations to ensure that if someone was affected by COVID, that we didn't wipe out all of air traffic in Australia as a result, to put some resilience in. Also continuing to operate and be ready for the recovery of the industry when it occurs. And at times it's been lumpy over the last few months, but being in front of that recovery because we didn't want to be in a position where we dampen that recovery on just how critical it is. And that's also not just based around service provision, but making sure that our controllers and firefighters are competent and ready when they've been at a low traffic levels to actually build up. So there's making sure that we can continue to provide the safety level. And the third part is about repositioning and reshaping the organisation to continue to support and deliver against that in a very different and changed industry going forward. And based on that, we have two documents that we wish to table. The first is a document which is an update to the charts that we had in our submission, which has got some further data points going forward. And the second chart is the effects on air traffic broken up into intrastate domestic, interstate domestic, international, and the effects of certain events to see what's occurred over the period of time.
It's like a waterfall.
Yes, that one. Or there's this one which has got some of the finance and traffic, but there's this one here which then shows you the effects that have occurred to interstate and interstate traffic levels and the work that we do.
Thank you, Dave.
But we're happy to take it.
Oh, look, thanks very much, Mr Hartfield. And I did want to seek some more information on what you've done with the firefighters, because there's always been a topical conversation every time we do get together. Last time we met, I think last time we had a public meeting, we were talking about reviewing numbers of firefighters around certain airports, weren't we?
So we were talking about undertaking that task resource analysis to work out what the staffing levels would be in for those stations, based on the fact that previously there wasn't that sort of real strong methodology to work out what the workload is and what's the appropriate staffing level. So that is underway.
Yes, then COVID, the cyclone came through and has hit us. So what has happened with the firefighters? Are they still the same numbers maintained, even though we know there's not the traffic going through the terminals where they might need a defibrillator, but they still might need one? What's happened? Are we at the same numbers?
We have the same numbers. There's been no change to the numbers. We have reduced what we would call category, the levels associated based on the round of just the reduction in air traffic. For example, where the A380 is involved, it's category 10 because there's no A380s. We've sort of reduced in that, but always in the position that as and goes back to that part about repositioning, being ready for the recovery. As air traffic comes in, we respond to make sure that we've got the right level of service.
All right, and we've just seen the figures here now, and it'll take a while to digest, so it's easy for me just to ask you, what has been the financial whack to air services compared to this time last year?
So if I just take in broad numbers, we've seen probably a 70 to 80% reduction in revenue. This we'll get into, no doubt, the government assistance and helping us through that particular period. But basically, it's around that number, fluctuates, but which is the equivalent of I've got the Chief Financial Officer will correct me here, it's about like an $800 million hole. One of the things that is the most effect is that because the way we're obviously supported and through industry charges, that our charging regime is based on weight and distance of the aircraft, so the weight of the aircraft versus the distance that's flown. And so just over 50% of our revenue normally is international traffic. And because that's gone, even with a full recovery domestically, we would still have quite a reduction.
All right, and that's a massive whack. Now let's talk about terms of, have we had any job losses, and what was the assistance packages, if any, provided by the government?
So I'll talk about potential or the job losses thing first, and then I'll hand to Mr. Logan to go through the details of that.
Yeah, okay.
We've gone through a process that, knowing that we need to sort of reshape and become.
You used to have, was about 1,200 employees at peak?
No, we have 3,600 employees. So we have 1,000 operational air traffic controllers,
right, okay,
800 so at the end of so we had 3,600 people at the end of 2019. There were numbers. At the 1st of March, we have 3,500. Those reductions have all been voluntary, particularly in the management.
Well, I remember this well,
Yep. So we've reduced, recently, we've reduced the management ranks by at least 30 roles. At the same time, we've offered redundancy to those people, and 70 people have decided to take redundancy in that space.
This is on top of the 100 already gone?
No, this is included
in
part of that 100.
Yeah.
So we've reduced the management ranks, and some have left on redundancy. We've just recently finished our consultation and have opened up for voluntary redundancy for those staff employed under our corporate agreement, if people would like to leave.
And how many are you seeking?
Sorry?
Is it an open slather, or is there...
It's not necessarily open slather. We go through a risk process of...
I mean, you're not going to chop people's heads off, sorry. I meant...
No.
Is there a limit to how many you are seeking, or is it just throw it out there and see who comes forward?
The thing is, you see who comes forward, and then we'll do an assessment to see whether... And there's also might be timings, because we'll have to readjust certain ways how we do things necessarily, but it's about using this for people, if they want to leave, they can, and allow us to readjust. Okay. And the other piece that we're underway of doing is that what we call a retirement incentive scheme. And this is for the operational air traffic controllers and firefighters, is that we have nearly 300 people that are the age of 56 or over as of the 1st of July this year.
Just in air traffic controls and
firefighting. There's about 130 in the firefighters and about 170 in the air traffic control ranks. Okay. And so we are projecting that over the next 3 years on our normal workforce planning, that they will retire and leave the organisation. So that in managing this particular period of time, we're looking at whether we incentivise their retirement to go early, so that we can open up the pipeline of recruits through, so that we don't slow that down, that we get in 3 years' time and traffic's coming back up, and we've had those people retire and we've got nobody coming back through. Okay. And but it's all on a voluntary basis, and people deciding whether they want to leave, not any forced.
Look, that's thank you for that, but just help me out here. So how long does it take to train a brand new into a acceptable standard air traffic control that you require, and same for firefighters?
So firefighter work on about 12 months in time in, a little bit shorter, and air traffic controller 2 years.
Okay. All right. And there's once again the same as the corporate voluntary redundancies. It's just see what's out there, who comes forward, and then you'll take it from there.
Yeah, and it's got a balance of risk because we still have to continue to
Yes.
operate and shape, but
Sure.
we're just seeing who would like to.
So I will never put words in your mouth, Mr. Hartfield, but I take it as that as redundancies will come to the fore, voluntary redundancies, Air Services Australia will still be one eye to how do we recruit back and train.
Absolutely.
Right, and that would be straight away. We wouldn't. Is that what you're planning? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, that's
So
encouraging, yeah.
if I think about the operational ranks, think of it as that I've got an ageing demographic that is due to retire over the next 3 years, and it's protecting to make sure we've got that workforce coming through so that when
Yeah.
traffic picks up, we're in a ready stop rather than slow it down now while restriction down. As an example, with the management reductions, is we reduced the roles by 30, yet we have allowed 70 to take redundancy, which is allowing us to recruit new capability and new people into the organisation as well.
That's good. That is good. That's good. Okay, Mr. Logan, walk us through, please, the government incentive packages that you
Thank you, Senator.
have access to.
Yeah, so essentially, so far we've received or had committed to 2 tranches of government assistance. The first tranche of government assistance was $400 million. That was essentially to cover the period from about February through to about September.
Yep.
At the same time, we weren't eligible for JobKeeper. And the funding was to do a couple of things. One was to enable us to continue services through that time period. The other was to enable the waiver of domestic charges for domestic operations. So domestic airlines operating on domestic routes, regional air traffic, general aviation, effectively we waived charges during that time period. Albeit, as Mr. Harfield said, the numbers were down substantially, 80% or so it was off a very low base. But essentially, we waived the fees through that period. So that $400 million was to cover those. We then, as September approached, the government then provided us with a second tranche of funding that amounted to $431.8 million. And that was to cover the rest of the financial year. So the first tranche covered from February through to September 2020. The second tranche was to cover from 1 October through to 30 June 2022. 21, sorry.
I know
Getting ahead of myself.
I know.
And so the $431 million again was to cover and enable us to provide and continue services, to provide us cash flow. And again, the waivers were then extended from September through to December. On 1 January, it converted into a 50% waiver. So it started as a 100% waiver. It's now working as a 50% waiver. And we were just advised recently that the government intends to extend that out to 30 September in terms of that waiver. So we'll be receiving some sort of funding for that 50% waiver at that point in time. That really gave us the ability to manage cash through to the end of 2022, financial year 2022. We're now in conversations with the government about what further funding...
to the beginning of financial...
To the beginning of the financial year.
Yes.
So we're in discussions now. I expect it'll go through the normal budget cycles in terms of what further funding the government may see as being appropriate.
Okay, all right. That's good. Now, as I always say every time I have a hearing, it's always dangerous to assume, but can I assume, or can you clarify, so the loss of $800 million, the government funding through the waivers and all sorts of stuff, did you have to stand anyone down or reduce their hours? They just continued being paid as per... Yeah. Well, there's one good news story out this whole inquiry. Senator Sheldon is the only one so far. Sorry.
Just to clarify, we did have to make some cost savings initiatives to... Because that even
that always scares me, that line.
No.
What's that mean?
No. Just wanted to clarify. It wasn't about reducing hours or removing people. There were other things about cost efficiencies in the organisation that we had to do. Because even with that government funding, it was probably bringing us back to sort of the 80-85% to where we would have been.
Yep.
And so there are other things indeed, but nothing to do with.
Well, that is good. And I know Senator Sheldon probably might have a question or two, but can I ask? Were there any pay rises during this period?
So for the management ranks, no. And there were no bonuses paid at all, and that's reflected
It'd
in
be
our
a brave
remuneration report.
CEO in the government.
Sorry?
As I said, it'd be a brave CEO in any government agency to fork out bonuses, I would assume. Okay.
Well, it's not appropriate when you... but during that time, there were pay rises associated with our enterprise agreements, which were honoured during that particular period, which is 2% for the air traffic controllers in April 2020, 1% for the fireys in December 20, and the corporate agreement was 2% in May 20. We still honoured those.
Well, it's not very often that I say this, but I think that is good leadership. It's great leadership. It's a shame our corporate captains don't act the same, isn't it, Senator Sheldon? But I won't fire you up on that. Senator Sheldon, did you have some questions of Air Services?
I know you've touched on this in the evidence you've given. And thank you again, welcome this afternoon now. It's after midday. It's good to see you both again. There was on the 28th of March, if I understand this correctly, the sum assistance comes to an end at that period. Is that right for you guys as well? Is that so? You just take me through those dates for the assistance package, the assistance you get, and then that would be helpful.
So 2 tranches. The first was February through to September 2020. The second was from October through to June 2021.
2021.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You're letting out secrets here, Mr.
I know. June 2021, so 2 tranches thus far.
Yep. And that and the extended from the 1st of January, the 50% for airlines that are part of the fee structure, and that's been extended to September. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. Has there been any other assistance that that there's been an indication that 2 things. Has there been any other assistance that the government that you would normally that you wouldn't have done pre-COVID that you've been asked to continue on with for the aviation industry? Is there any other types of assistance that you've been asked to bear? Any other costs or?
No, none that I'm aware of. No, Senator.
Is there what's your expectation on to successfully run air services in the coming 12 months? Of the sort of funding and support that you'll need?
Thanks, Senator. In aggregate, the hole created by the reduced volumes is probably still in the order of 60 to 70%. So in round numbers, in terms of revenue shortfalls, it's probably, depending on what volumes come through, anywhere between sort of $600 and $800 million in terms of operating cash flows. On top of that, we do have a capital investment program, and we still believe we should be investing in critical national infrastructure as we go forward. And so we're seeking some support for some of that going forward, and that can form in either further revenue supplements that we've received to date. It could be in the form of equity from the government, it could be in the form of debt. Typically in our capital investment program, we fund that off debt to start off with, and then sort of recover it through charges going forward.
Yeah. Is there just looking forward, and particularly the capital investment to keep the aviation industry vital? Obviously, it's not. We're looking at 2024 if things are back to pre-COVID stage, if that's still our projection. Again, that's your projection as well, 2024? Or,
yes, no.
If that's the case, then obviously we don't want to be making decisions about investment in infrastructure when we need it, and also obviously that ongoing improvements in infrastructure and I'm not going to say maintenance, but wear and tear, replacement of infrastructure. How important is that to the successful operating of air services and its service to the aviation industry, is that we invest in that infrastructure sooner rather than later?
Extremely important, Senator. The way we've looked at that investment was back in February, March, April. At that point in time, before we were certain on what the government commitments were, we took a view on what the minimal capital investment might be, and we targeted a continuation of the One Sky program and our critical telecommunications network, and looked closely at our asset sustainment program, which is looking at the maintenance and ongoing of those sorts of things. As we understand the industry recovery, in the first instance, we looked at some of the longer term investments that we had that were typically trying to solve congestion problems going out into the future, and we put a range of those on pause for a period of time. We're going through the regular cycle that we would do at this time of year to say, should we be bringing some of those back? And are the projections showing promise to say that growth will return strongly, and therefore how should we return those to the capital program?
Yep.
Essentially, we've got a very dynamic program. Just recently, we did look at our asset sustainment program. We provided additional funding into that to make sure that we had adequate financial funding going in for sustainment, and we're looking closely at the next financial year to say what's a suitable amount going forward. We will look at again where there's opportunities to leverage technology, and therefore we will be looking at some technology programs, things like digital aerodrome services and the like, given now might be an opportunity to explore those and bring those on a bit faster. So it's a dynamic plan at the moment while we're trying to wrap ourselves around the industry and support them as they grow back. It's then continually reassessing the business cases to say what's an appropriate timing to bring those kind of projects and programs back.
Just because dollars means one thing, but actual projects probably makes more something I can touch and feel almost. What sort of projects have been held up, and what sort of projects, in light of both the held up ones and that you would see as high priority in any future trench?
Yeah, so in the
projects?
shorter term, we reassessed things like we had an airport collaborative decision-making project that was looking at how do we digitally help to collaboratively handle congestion issues at airports. The airlines obviously have had significant impacts and weren't necessarily in a position to support that at this time frame, so we've paused that program for the time being. We got it to a certain point and we've put in certain new protocols and technologies around that. Another program would be things like our long-range air traffic flow management. So if you can imagine the long distances that international airlines fly, at the moment, again, there's not a lot of international aircraft flying, and therefore we've paused that program. The other ones that we, again, sort of temporarily paused were things like new runways in Melbourne and Perth, and some of the early works that we would be normally doing now, just to understand what their intentions are going forward, and we're obviously working closely with them to support their intentions. So they might be a few examples.
And how would you prioritise for the next, for the immediate future? Just keep that quite relatively broad, but the immediate future on projects, how would you prioritise those projects and potentially others as being of some urgency?
So the most immediate ones, and Mr. Harfwit will clearly have a view on this as well, is the One Sky program. Is that that's doing two things. One is replacing our core air traffic management system, and the other part is to deliver significant benefits into the industry over the next 15 to 20 years. So a key part of our infrastructure. On top of that, the telecommunications network that sits behind that needs modernisation, and therefore it's continuing down that path. They're probably the two key priorities, and then we're looking at opportunities to see whether digital aerodrome services could be brought in earlier rather than later. But I'm not sure if Mr. Harffield
Yeah,
wants to add.
another one is the asset replacement for the fire service with vehicles and that going forward. As some say, growth is going to return and it's going to robust, and we've also seen signs of other airspace users as well, not just conventional traffic, that the use cases of things like drones, urban air mobility are starting to emerge now. And so it's about taking this opportunity to make sure that we're in front of probably 4 or 5 years' time, knowing the lead time of some of these investments that are required. So we don't want to sort of pause too much on our investment cycle. We sort of saw something very similar when ANZAC collapsed, that run down to reduce, and at that stage there was only I think it was about a $60 million hole back in 2002. So it wasn't it was a sizable hole, but nothing like what we've seen this time. And then if we haven't timed some of our infrastructure and stop it and reduce it, as well as like training, in 4 or 5 years' time down the track, when growth has returned and it's all there, we're just not in a position to provide the services. So we're trying to look out 5, 6 years to what we require and make sure that's in place now.
Just going to this point of the projects that were put on hold, and you raised Mr. Logan and cuts across the comments just then. Thank you, Mr. Harfield. But obviously, there's a number of workers that are engaged in doing that of high skill level. Have you been able to retain that group of workers, or has it been a situation where you've had to say, well, something's got to shift because of some of the pressures on finances, and some of those workers have had to be been offered redundancy rather than wanting them necessarily to take redundancy because of the projects being held up?
We add some more detail to it, but initially some of what we had as contractors that were sort of temporary employees at the start, around the March, April last year, we didn't renew any of their contracts, but a lot of our project staff are permanent employees, and so although they had sort of reduced workload, they haven't been pushed in a redundancy sense. So they're there. Things like One Sky, for example, and even the Enterprise Network Modernisation Program, which is our telecommunication infrastructure network, those people have been continuing on doing what they need to do. So we've tried to, Paul, Mr. Logan, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've even tried to redeploy them into other areas at this particular stage to keep them occupied and working through, rather than reduce that and then not have the capacity to come back when we actually have to ramp things up.
I'm pretty sure there's a balancing act, but even contractors, I would suspect that, I've known lots of contractors that are vital to businesses, and losing a contractor means they could be quite easily picked up somewhere else, so when they're needed, they're not available. Do you have a concern that might be the scenario, or?
In some cases, the decisions we made, this was in the March, April time frame before the government funding was locked in and kicked in. So this is where we had to make a decision of those type of contractors. If my memory serves me correct, if there was someone that was that high value, that was so critical, that wouldn't have occurred. It was where we could get the service aid, or somebody else internally could cover those particular issues, because that very that if we let go of critical resource, then the issue was how do you get it back? Because it could get picked up, or that sound like a third an object to the night, but they could get picked up somewhere else. However, we're not in that position anymore, and so we're able to manage these things in a much more considered way.
And then just there's been some issues raised about particularly STEM skills and retaining staff in that scenario, because they're obviously out there in the marketplace even during COVID are in hot demand.
Yep.
Are you finding pressure do you find pressure within the business that people are being lured away elsewhere?
Not so much, no.
Any other questions?
Okay, and I'll wrap up on this if I can, Mr. Hartfield. Thanks, Senator Sheldon. Yesterday, Qantas had said they talk weekly, sometimes daily, with the government, as we believe you're all part of those conversations. But they also said that they were hoping, and I will correct the record if I'm wrong, that by October this year, they hope to have 40 to 50% of international travel opened up. Now, we heard sobering comments from Treasury, quoting IATA's figures. that I think it was about 2023 before I don't know if it'll get back to normal or start again. Mr. Hartfield, with Air Services Australia, can you shine any light on where did Qantas come up with these international travel? Is it true? Is that possible?
My opinion is that I'm not necessarily privy to what they may be seeing or whatever. We just want to be in a position to react that, and hopefully it does.
Okay.
The IATA forecast was really about bringing it back to the levels pre-COVID,
yeah, okay.
rather than the gradual. The only thing that I'm aware of is the discussions that the industry is having as a whole, and even globally, around about how do you facilitate international travel, but we're focusing on trying to get it back as soon as possible.
All right. I'm just hoping for those jobs. That's what I was hoping for. I was hoping they knew something that no one else knew. All right. Well, Mr. Hartfield and Mr. Logan, thank you so much. Just one thing, Mr. Hartfield, before you do go, you're half the man you were when you first started coming to Senate Estimates, and whatever your diet secrets are, you need to share them with me. We'll see you at Senate Estimates. Okay? Thanks very much. See ya.